My skin is velvet, brackish pelt, soft and heavy draping. My eyes are two wet waterstones blinking through salt lashes. The moon is in my belly, sometimes full, most times dark, always red. Words have passed my teeth in language song, in the wild sound of birthing. In the fullness of time, all things become ripe. Welcome. We are going now to the middle of the night and the shipping news. And it goes something like this. Cape Wrath, not like that. Cape Wrath, Orkney, Shetland, storm imminent, becoming cyclonic, losing its identity by midnight. So it is a winter's night, and we're going to go far, far north, off the north coast of Scotland, over islands and skerries, to the northernmost rocky island of the Orkneys. And that island is low to the sea, and salt, windswept, harsh. And around its perimeter is a dry stone wall about 8 feet high. And between that wall and the sea is a rocky shore. And every full moon at the high tide, that rocky shore is draped in seaweed and kelp. And that rocky shore is the one and only living place for a very particular sheep. It's an old Viking sheep, and they only eat seaweed. And so they have, over the centuries, grown a fleece that is the same colour as the whetstones. And they are of the sea, and they smell of the sea. Now, on this rocky shore, at midnight, we are taken to a space where something quite miraculous happens. So, on this night, a rookery of seals have come to the island inlet to give birth. Now, something very particular happens around the coastline of England and British Isles, is that the seals start to give birth in late summer on the coast of Cornwall, up the coast to Scotland around late autumn and midwinter. We've reached the islands, and then off to the east in January around the Faroes. And this is just how it has been. The seals give birth by a clock that is all their own. And so by the time they reached this northernmost island of the Orkneys, it's midwinter, or the full moon closest to midwinter. And that is where we are tonight, in our story. And the seals have their way lit by the full moon to the rocky shore. But these are no ordinary seals, as I'm sure you already guessed. These are the Selkie. These are the shape-shifting seal women. And the full moon, once a month, allows them to shed their skin and to dance in the moonlight, to be wild. And so we see this group of seals shedding their skins. They put them on the rocks, drape them over the stones. The sheep are having a little nap by the wall, and I leave them there. And they dance in the moonlight. Some of them have got big pregnant bellies, some of them are younger, some of them are older. And they have this moment of freedom. But on this night, there was a lonely fisherman from the stone croft on the island. And he became curious, I think is the word, about these seal women. And he went to look, and he watched them, and he found them beautiful. And he suddenly realised he was quite lonely, digging root vegetables and feeding the seaweed to the sheep. Wasn't it great? life up there. And he did something that he knew he should not do. He reached out and he took a seal skin off the rock and he went into the shadows with it. And the seals didn't notice. The Selkie were dancing. They just carried on. And the moon began to set and they all began to gather and realise it's time to go back to the sea, and putting on their seal skins like hooded capes. And one by one going back, until the one who could not find her skin started to panic. She thought she had misplaced it. Where had it gone? She remembered it being there with the rest. And as she panicked, the fisherman stood up from his hiding place in the shadows, holding her skin. Now there's a very specific law that governs the other place and our place. You don't take from that place without great cost. The values are different there, and if you took a handful of coins, it would become old, crumpled leaves in the next day. And so he had trespassed by doing this. But they both knew that there was a binding that had happened. There was a law. And the law was that she had to stay with him for 7 years. And she knew it, and he knew it. And so she eyeballed him and she said, I will be your good wife for these 7 years. But doubt it not, on that 7th year I will be gone. And he knew it. But it had been done. So she went back to the stone croft with him, and she was his good wife. She tended to the root vegetables, and she fed the seaweed sheep, and in tune with her seal nature, she gave birth to 1 child each year. And at the 7th birthing, she knew that the next full moon was her time to return, and that the deal had been done. But what she didn't reckon on was that the fisherman would say no. Can't have your skin back. And at that point she broke. The 7 years of rage broke, and she was stricken. I need my skin back. I do not belong here. You took me from my life. You've broken the law that governs our worlds. I need to go home. He said no. And that night he crept out of the croft. He'd taken the Selkie skin from its hiding place in the eaves of the croft, bundled it up, and he went to the compost heap of all places, and he lifted up all the bits and pieces and he dug down into the peaty earth, and that is where he put the Selkie skin. Covered it back over, because he thought he'll be keeping her after all. What's she going to do? And the next day was the full moon, and the Selkie sisters were arriving, and she watched from the cottage in her dress and her apron, longing, pining to go. But she couldn't, and she was defeated. And so she went and stood on the shoreline and just watched. But then she felt a little tug on her apron. She looked down. It was one of her little children. Mama, what is this? I saw Papa bury it in the garden. Is it a treasure that he should do that? Handed it to its mother. But Selkie took this bundle from her child, not daring to believe what it was, and she brushed the soil off it and shook it out. And it was a pelt, the colour of wet stone. And without second thought, she took off her apron, she took off her dress. She started to put the sealskin back on her like a cape, and she knew she had to go. And she looked, and her child, she's waving her goodbye, because in their innocence they had given her back her freedom. And so the Selkie ran to the sea and was gone. And so, on that island today, there are many dark-eyed inhabitants. And they dig the rooty vegetables and they feed the seaweed to the sheep. And on a full moon, they do not venture far from their hearth fire, because they all know the story of the Selkie, who is their ancestor. And they all know that which was hidden will be brought to light. And so, my tale is told, and it belongs to you. Thank you for being here and sharing this space with us tonight. Some amazing music and telling for you, all on the Selkie theme. Next, I would like to introduce Tracy Jane Sullivan on harp with a Orkney folk song called The Seal Woman's Sea Joy. This whole project has been an exploration in the folklore, the history, and also there are a lot of people working with the Selkie now in their art and in their storytelling. So I'd like to introduce Kim at the back, who's filming.
Oh, hi.
The film will form part of a research project for another theatre maker who will be continuing the Selkie revival, I suppose. So now I would love to introduce Fleur Shorthouse, who is going down a weavery route with a story called The Town with No Spiders.
Yeah. Well, I was told by my good friend Sharon that, oh, by the way, can I just let you marvel at this gorgeous creation made by you know who? And just to say that, can you see the mermaid scales? If you look carefully, you can see them. Can you see them? Yeah, she wove real live mermaid scales. Indeed, they're hard to find. But this evening, it's not about mermaids, is it? It's about Selkies. That's it. That's the only reference it gets. Well, yeah, I'm told that this story came from Donegal in Ireland. But I think that this could really happen anywhere. I think it could even happen in Sussex. It could happen in any of those little villages where you have seals or selkies. You know, maybe in New Haven or Seaford, where these lovely mats were woven, or maybe even in Tyne Mills, where, well, it's washed away now, but maybe it happened there. But you've heard a little bit about Selkie. You've heard about the Selkie, that they are seals in the sea, but when they come up onto land, they shake off their seal skin and they become human beings just like you and me. And there are many, many stories of, no, I've got people shaking their heads. Did you get that? That they're seals in the land, seals in the sea.
Sorry, they heard my phone ping and now they were...
Oh, sorry!
Sorry.
Oh my God, somebody shaking their head. Right, the thing about these stories though is they usually contain this sadness that you've told us about, because it's difficult for love to stretch between land and sea, isn't it? But this story that I'm going to tell you, it contains a hope that Ashley will see her mother again. Barak and Dowan Allah, the town with no spiders. In this town, all of the men were fishermen and all of the women made lace. Such lace you would not believe, whether it was conjured by needlepoint or by pins and bobbins on a cushion, or maybe made on a frame. It was so exquisitely beautiful you would gasp if you saw this work. The moment that a baby was born in the village, plop, onto her head was put a bonnet of such exquisite beauty it would caress and hold on to this baby's velvety head with no need for button or ribbon. And if you went into the houses, you would see that hanging in every single window were lace curtains. And when the sun shone through, they would cast mountainscapes around the rooms, or beautiful images like light filtered through apple leaves. And it would give the people this feeling of such well-being, such contentment. It was better than mindfulness, you will say they thought. In the church, the altar was covered with a cloth that gave the same radiant beauty, and it was like truth emanated from this altar. And it kept the priest happy, that and the wine. And the collars that the women wore, it made them so beguiling and so beautiful that they would keep the men close and obedient. And that was the way they liked it. So everybody in this village was kept good by the lace. But what was funny about this was that none of the lace that was worn or hung in the village was made by the women who toiled in the lace house. Oh no. All of their work was packed up and sent off to market. But this lace that was in the village, every single loop of it was made by Granny McShilling. Granny McShilling was old. So old. She'd always been old to the oldest person in the village. Her skin lay in leathery folds on her face and dragged her lower lids down and made her eyes sore. Her eyes were blue, but they looked black. She would have a bonnet pulled far down, and it looked sometimes like when she was concentrating, she was looking through the top of her bonnet. She was plump, well, round, without being fat. And she had these spindly ankles, and sometimes you would see them and you'd always be shocked about how hairy they were. So there was something strange about Granny McShilling, but she was very welcoming. Everybody, no matter how clumsy they were, was welcomed into the lace house to make lace. And the little girls would come in, and the first rude attempts at lace making would crawl out from under their fingers, limping. And when the girls had gone, Granny McShilling would gently pick up their work, unpick it, correct it, so that when they came back the next day, they were always pleased with what they'd done. And this is the way things were. Well, Granny McShilling loved to listen to the prattling stories and the talk that the girls had. And she would listen to everything ever so carefully. And the conversations that she liked the most, though, were the conversations with the older girls, yeah? Especially when it got to the subject of who they wanted to marry. Granny McShilling's ears were flapping at that point. And one of the favourite conversations was the pattern on the lace of your wedding veil that you would choose. One girl would say, "Oh, I want birds and bells." And another girl might say, "Oh, I would like flowers and ice." But Granny McShilling would remember all of these ideas long after the girls had forgotten them. And also, when she was wandering around, she might just notice that the hair had fallen from your head. And she'd just go around and collect those. And when she was working in the lace house late at night, and thinking of all of those wedding veils and creating them, she might weave in a hair into her work, and in that way conjure some spells. And this is how, you see, the lace kept everybody happy. Although there was one girl who wasn't really interested in these conversations about marriage, because she knew that there was no way she was going to be able to marry the boy that she loved. She was in love with Colum, and Colum was from away. He was from the mountains, and he was a poor boy. And her father, he was rich, yeah, and jealous, and a bit angry, and a bit greedy. And so Aisling knew there was no way that she was going to marry her love. And so when they asked her, "Well, what will your wedding veil be like?" she'd make impossible suggestions like, "Oh, light as dark as midnight." And people would shrug and think she was strange. And this is the way it was. Anyway, our story begins at Beltane. Who knows what Beltane is?
May Day.
Exactly. Okay, so it's a spring festival. And in this village, at the spring festival, the young were allowed to run amok. And they would engage in pranks and all kinds of naughtiness, and they would never get told off because the older people, well, they would remember what it was like when they were young. And so if Mrs O'Shaughnessy's washing had been hoisted up the mast of some fishing ship, or if there was a fishing net over the top of the spire, it didn't matter. One of the favourite things that the girls would do was pick up snails and put them on plates, and they'd watch the snails go around the plate, and then if you took the snail off and held it up to the moonlight at midnight, you would be able to discover the initials of the boy that you were going to marry. Yeah. But Aisling wasn't interested in any of this. She met Colum. She left all of it behind her, and they went to their secret cove, and on the secret cove they hunted limpets. You know limpets, you can creep up on them and then get them off the rocks. You don't even need a knife. And they'd kindle a fire and cook the limpets, and they would feast on the limpets, and after they'd sing songs and tell stories. And as they did, the Selkie heads would bob up in the surf, and they'd be sung up onto the shore, and there they'd bask with their little ones, and they'd listen to the songs and the stories beneath the moon. And when the first light was seen over the sea at dawn, Colum and Aisling would sing their farewell song, their favourite song. My love will not have me, but I understand. She wants a freeholder who has a house and land. I cannot maintain her. We silver and gold, and all of the fine things that a big house will hold. If I were a merchant, I could write a fine hand, and I'd write her a letter that she would understand. I'd write it by the river where the waters overflow. I love my pretty Sarah. Wherever I go. With that, we give each other a peck on the cheek. Go their separate ways. The next morning, he didn't say why, but Aisling's father was furious. And he said to her that she would be married within a year and a day, and that she had to choose somebody that he would approve of, otherwise he would choose himself. So a horrible fear descended on Aisling and Colin. And she was quiet for the whole of the summer months. She didn't say anything to her father about what the choice might be. And then when the autumn came, she kept her mouth shut. But there was this terrible sadness between Aisling and Colin. And by the time midwinter came around, well, the father's temper got the better of him. And because Aisling was silent, he made a decision that there was going to be a fishing competition, and that whoever won the fishing competition would marry Aisling. He would win her hand in marriage. A despair fell upon Aisling and Colin. What could they do? The date was set for the equinox, and the equinox came around. And in the run-up to that time, Aisling's life in the village was unbearable. Because all the girls, they thought the most hilarious thing was to talk to Aisling and laugh about who she might end up marrying. And a lot of the boys, well, they would just look at her with absolute pity. But some of them, they looked at her as if they already owned her, and the worst one of those was Liam. Long, lanky Liam. Arrogant, angry, mean Liam. He was a relation of Granny McShilling, and he spoke to her and asked for help. And that night, she sat up all night and she wove a net so stiff with spells, he was sure to win. And the day the competition came around, 6 boats went out, 6 boats came back. And there was a carnival festival in the village. And the piles of fish were displayed there on the quay. And actually, to tell you the truth, all of the piles of fish, they were pretty much the same size. Although actually maybe Jim Munro's actual fish were a bit bigger than everybody else's. But next to Liam's pile of fish, there were 3 dead seals. 2 adults and a pup. You see, everybody knows how much fishermen hate seals. Not only do they eat all the fish, they make holes in the nets. And fishermen hate nothing more than sitting there, mending their nets, when they could be out making money. So of course, it was Liam who won. And you should have seen him gloating over his prize. And he knew that the next Beltane, well, that's when he would be marrying Aisling. And Colin knew it as well. And he didn't say goodbye, but Aisling heard that he left for the mountains. And so she found herself on the day before her wedding, packing. It was the most abysmal thing. Packing away her old life and packing a bag for a new life with a vile husband who she hated. And so she just left it. She left it. She left it all behind and she went to the sea. Now, I didn't tell you about Aisling's mum, did I? Yeah, were you wondering where she was? Yeah, well, nobody knew. It was said that she was lost at sea. The word dead was never used. She was never told that her mother was in heaven, but she was told that her mother was lost. And so she would often go down to the water's edge and she'd feel compelled into the water. And she'd feel compelled to go to the north as well. But grief told her, her reason told her, that this was just a kind of grief, you know, and that she didn't need to listen to that voice. But now, what else did she have? What else did she have but to listen to this? And so she put on her coat and tied back her hair, and north she went. Down onto the beach, onto the shingle, over the boulders, round the head. North she went. The tide, it seemed to be out for ages, and she didn't even care if it came in and washed her away. North and north and north she went, and in the gloaming, she came to a cave. She entered the cave, and inside the cave was a strange woman. A strange woman with great big feet, lounging on a rock, with arms that seemed to stick out at funny angles, and with hair pulled back so tight, well, maybe she didn't even have any hair at all, you couldn't really tell in the, you couldn't really tell in the, because it was so dark. And the woman said to her, "My child, I have waited a long time for you. What took you so long?" With these words, Aisling opened up a torrent of sadness, and she told this strange woman everything. She told her about the competition, about Colin, about Liam, about her father. She told her everything. And when she got to the bit about the 3 seals, this woman, she threw back her head and she let out a frightening, keening that resounded around the cave. But she listened to everything that Aisling had to say, and after Aisling had finished, she felt for the first time in her life that somebody had seen her and heard her. It wasn't Colin. Yeah. And then the woman said to Aisling, "Before you go, I can give you the gift of tears." And this gift fell like a stone in her stomach. Tears, she thought. I have tears? What do I need tears for? And she thanked the woman and left. And as she walked out of the cave, 2 tears rolled down her cheeks. And they fell from her chin. And before they hit the floor, they flew up in the air as little birds. One as bright as moonlight, and one as bright as midnight. And these 2 little birds, they flitted around her, and then off they went to the village. Aisling walked home to the village, resigned to her fate. She didn't know that those 2 little birds went into every single window of every single house and pick, 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 peck, peck, peck. They pecked out the hairs, and they pecked out the spells and the curtains, and then up through the eaves into the church. Pick, 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 peck, peck, peck. And they picked out the hairs and the spells of the altar cloth. And then tap, 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 they went on the window of the lace house, because they knew that Aisling's wedding veil was in there, but the lace house was locked, and in her sleep, Granny McShilling ground her teeth. But off they went to the mountains. Swooping, darting, off they went to the mountains, and there they saw Colin in the mountains, contemplating the cold water. And one of them darted around in front of him on the water, and the other one just hovered behind his head. And he saw this one, and he kind of felt this one, and then this one in front of him, it joined the one behind him. And they swooped and darted, and then off they went towards the village. And in that moment, he knew that Aisling needed him, and he knew that he had to get to her as quickly as possible. And so he went striding over the mountains to capture his love. Meanwhile, in the village, the next morning, Aisling got up, got dressed, and she did as she was told. Into the lace house she went. And there Granny McShilling plaited her hair, nice tight knots, and they coiled them around her head. And that veil, it was lifted in front of her, and it did shimmer like moonlight. She was beguiled, and it was put on her head, and she was taken out of the lace house, and she was taken into the church. And in the church, it was filled with people, and they cooed as she walked up the aisle. And there was Liam, standing at the aisle, waiting for her. And she put her hand in his, and he lifted up her veil. And the priest started to speak to all the people, and the people agreed to something. And then the priest spoke to Liam, and he asked him something. And as he did, the door opened and light flooded into the church. And two little birds came flitting around, and one of them started picking and pecking at Aisling's veil. And the other one, he came over to Liam. Now Liam was resolute, and he was going to say his vows, and he opened up his mouth to say his vows. And as he did, one of those little birds, it flew into his mouth and it plucked out his tongue. It plucked out his tongue and every single vicious word that he'd ever said with it. And Liam staggered and cried as he tried to get out of the church, and he staggered down the aisle, and all of the people, they clutched their children to them. They were horrified. They looked on agog, and they all poured out of the church after him. And Granny McShilling picked up the tongue, and she went trying to push through everybody to get hold of Liam so that she could weave it back on. He was terrified, and he was off there out the church, and the whole church was clearing. And then Aisling, standing at the altar, saw as the church cleared, there was Colin. And they ran to each other, and they embraced, and they confessed their love. And in the shadows, Father was watching. And in that moment, he knew what to do. But outside, things were not going well for Granny McShilling, because all of the windows of all of the houses had suddenly blown open with a great gust of wind. And all of the lace curtains were slowly unravelling in the turbulence. And they created a great cloud of cotton. And they created a great net, a web in the sky. And this web was worrying and tussling Granny McShilling and her funny little bandy legs that were first of all 2 bandy legs, but then it looked like there was 4 or maybe even more bandy legs, and suddenly her bonnet flew off and you could see these funny were they hair clips or what was it? And she was bundled by this great terrifying web, and she was bundled through the village and up on the cliff, and she was bundled over the cliff and down below. There was a great seal. He was waiting for her. That afternoon, there was a wedding between Colin and Aisling. Well, the priest had decided that you couldn't really let all of that wine go to waste, could you? You couldn't really. You couldn't let all the food go to waste and all the wine go to waste. And everybody was in a mood for a wedding, and Father had seen the lights. And so Aisling and Colin, they were married together. And in the evening, when everybody had finished drinking and eating, and when they'd all danced and had fun, and when they'd talked about how liberated they feel and how a little bit worried they felt about the anxiety of the future, after that had all finished, everybody went home. And the women realised that there weren't any curtains in the windows. And so, they opened up their bottom drawers and they picked out their own work that they'd stashed away, and they put them in the windows, and they noticed that in every single window frame there was a tiny little spider just come to weave their own webs. And so the town that had no spiders but one vicious one now had no vicious spiders, but many millions of little ones in the corners, the window frames. And that's my story.
To make the story.
Oh, thanks to my friend Sharon.
Hi, it's time for a musical interlude. Yeah, I'd like to introduce Moonchild and Alice, who are the Butterfly Wheel, and they will be performing some beautiful otherworldly music. And then we're going to have a little tea break or a drinky break. Regroup, let all those images settle, and come back in a little while. So I'll let the promotions to you.
it was this next song was a prayer for the sea and for the wisdom of the earth and the sea.
Oh, Maria, Selkie woman. And I imagine it on the wild west coast, probably off the coast of Donegal, where they have a bunch of little tiny islands called the Blasket Islands, which were inhabited right up until the 1930s. And what went on in those islands, well, it's only the island people and their stories to tell us. There was a farmer, and he was walking along the coast, coming to collect the seaweed, the gifts that the sea had brought. Now, he would have nothing to do with the sea. It was mysterious and wide and wild and wonderful, I'm sure, but his feet were firmly planted on the ground. And as he walked along, he sang, as many people in Ireland do, a song. Doola manna binya wee, doola manna gwela, doola manna binya wee, doola manna gwela. Coming to collect that seaweed to put it on the fields, coming to collect the seaweed to, well, what's this? There's a line, a red streaming line down the beach, running along. And he looked, and there, wedged in between these rocks, was a woman. Naked, beautiful, but keening, and trying with all of her might to stop the bleeding of her feet, which were really badly damaged. And as he went over to see what was the matter, she looked up at him with deep green eyes full of pain. Well, you won't be walking on those very soon. Come with me. You can heal yourself up at my cottage. And without waiting for a word of yes or no, he picked her up, wrapped his shirt around her, and flung her over his shoulder, and off he walked to his cottage. And she, over his shoulder, looked out to the sea, to see the 3 dear heads of her children bobbing up the waves. So he took her to the cottage, but he came back later. Because, you know, living on those islands, he'd heard all the stories of the Selkie and the good people and the leprechauns. He didn't believe any of that stuff, but they're there. So, he had a little poke around, and he went back to where he found her, and sure enough, wedged in between the rocks of a tide pool was the skin. I mean, it was tattered and it was torn, and who would have use of that anyways? So he rolled it up in a ball. He thought he should give it to her, but then he thought again. And to tell you the truth, I think it scared the shit out of him. So he picked it up and he threw it into the sea, and the sea waved up a big hand, took it, and sucked it down. To churn it, and turn it, and rend it, and tear it to bits. And as he looked out, he saw 3 heads bobbing up on the waves. And he turned back and went to the cottage. Now, once her feet were healed, she gratefully did things around the house and the farm. And he quite got used to her company, and he never told her about the skin. But when he was asleep, she went back down to the beach to look for that which was her own. And she searched and searched and searched in the coves and the caves and in all the tidal pools and the rocks and the crevices and the cracks. She couldn't find it everywhere. Stood on the threshold of that which was her world with no way in, no door. Scanning the horizon for her children. She stumbled back to the croft and did the work around the house and the farm. And after a while, he asked her, well, did she have any plans? Was she going to go anywhere? Or what did she think? And she just sort of shrugged. And he generously offered her a place right there with him because, you see, he'd been quite lonely since his wife died, and she could take up that place right there with him, and he'd take good care of her. So she agreed to a counterfeit life because she didn't feel there was a choice. Now, the people in the village, the scarce little place inhabited by people that had known each other for generations, who liked to look at her.
Did you see the green eyes? It's like they're looking right through you. She doesn't even see you, and I've never heard her smile or laugh or nothing. No, I'm telling you, it's the hands. It's the hands and the feet. Look at the feet, the webs, the webs. Did you see them? Yeah. She's not one of ours, and we don't know her people. Where's she from? Esh! Now shut your mouth. Come in here, girl. Sit down with us now. And Peg sat her next to her. And the women, when they gather, they don't just talk, because that would be idle. Women always have work to do. And so they pulled it right out of their bags and their pockets, all of the carving, and the twisting, and the spinning, and the sewing. And Peg got out a frame, and she took the yarn, and she wrapped it round and round and round like a harp. And then she took the shuttle, and with that wrapped around with the yarn, she pushed it in and up and over, under, around, and through, and back. Over, under, around, and through, and back. Who is coming in?
I'm sold out, so that I'll check on
Okay. But keep your presence. And there, the woman watched this work. And she followed it with her eyes. And something sparked in those eyes because it was emotion. It was a rhythm that she recognized. Don't you like it? I'll teach you how. So. And Peg taught her how to weave. And she gave her a frame. And she took it back. And she learned that craft. Now she still walked on the beach, picking up bits and pieces of things to weave into those blankets with patterns that were nothing like anybody on that island ever saw. And in 9 months' time, she gave birth to a boy with eyes as green as hers and webbed fingers and toes. And that child never made a sound, not a cry, not a whimper, not a smile, not a gurgle. And she kept that child away from the sea, although she herself still made many pilgrimages down there. Now, when that child was 9 months old, and when the woman was walking on the beach with the creel, which is a basket on your back, to come and collect the seaweed, in this large, big lump of kelp, she was sifting through it, and what did she find but a strip of something black with silver running through it? And her skin began to tingle, and her nose began to quiver, and her eyes began to weep. It was a piece of her own dear skin. And she dug further and further and further, and she found more and more strips of it, and there at the bottom was the hood and the wide back. But it was kind of a mess. She took all the bits and pieces, and she took a huge, big thing of salt water so she could put it on her face and eyes and keep it wet, because her eyes were stinging sore, and her skin was starting to flake and tear off. Like as if you had like eczema or psoriasis. And then she put it on her loom, and she began to weave it together and put it together. Once it was all together, she put it into a bundle and hid it underneath the loom. And there came that night a big storm out of the sea, as if the sea was angry, for it lashed and smashed against the head wall, and all the rocks as if it was cracking them together, and wild, moaning, keening sounds came from the sea, sounds of pain and anger. Jesus, it's a band. She was coming to collect our souls, said the man. And every night it got louder and closer and louder and closer. The woman said nothing. And finally, it was like right at the door of the house, banging on the door, wild with screaming. And then the child began to cry, the one that never said a sound. He began to cry with fear and anger. This storm has come to claim one of us very people, our own child. I've got to put a stop to it, said the man, as if you could mansplain the sea or the weather. "No," said the woman, "I'll go." And she stood at the door and said, "Leave all of us in peace and safety here." But the cries became louder and stronger and fiercer and sharper. So she reached down under the loom, gathered that bundle, slipped outside the door, and all was quiet. And she shook it out and put it on like a hood, wrapped it around herself. The babe was still crying in the cradle. And where was herself? When was she coming back in? He waited a while and then he went out again. All around the house, all up and down in the farm, you could find nothing. But the storm had stopped and the moon was out full. And from the fierce moonlight, he could see a wide, wet swath like a path from the door to the sea. And in every fence post and furze bush, little tufts of gray fur. He was angry. How could she desert us after all I did for her? Ugh! And leaving the child with no mother's warmth and no mother's milk. He picked up the child. He tried to croon and sing to it. That didn't work out so well. The child continued to bleat and cry all night long. "Ah, you poor bab, your mother, she's left ya. She's gone away and abandoned you, so she has." The next morning there was a commotion in the farmyard. The farmer looked out, and there, amidst all of his brown cows, was a white cow that he'd never seen before. And he went out to have, a little inspect of this amazing creature. It was magnificent, and every time it shook itself, jet streams of water splashed everywhere, salt water, and the udders were full, and he pulled some of the creamiest milk, and as soon as the child drank it, it quieted down, and it would drink no other milk. Now this boy grew up healthy and strong, but he was lonely because the townspeople thought the same of him as they thought of the mother. He's got them green eyes, and the feet, and the hands, and kissing. He doesn't smile either. Jesus, like her. But although the farmer never told him the exact story, he told him the same thing he told all the other people. Sure, she was walking on the beach and was swept. She was swept away. Didn't say she died either. She was swept. Swept by the sea. He loved the sea. It didn't put him off at all. He swam with the seals that came and sat on the rocks. Glorious time. He helped on the farm. He was a good lad, but when he came of age, he announced to his father that he was going to sea. He was going with a fishing fleet. What? But this farm is your inheritance. You're all the kin I have. How can you leave me? You are my legacy. I know, but I have to go. I'm called, Father. I want to go to the sea. I want to go on the fleet that swims and catches the biggest fish out there. The sharks and the tuna and the whale. And he wouldn't fish with anybody that killed his friends the seals. Had no truck with them at all. So off he went. And they got way far out to sea. But a squall broke up and it tossed that boat and all the souls on it over. And he himself was buffeted and twisted down into the depths, but rushing towards him was a big black seal, and he grabbed onto its neck instinctively and swam away with it. And the next thing you know, he woke up on this little, like a spit, an eyot, a tiny island in the middle of nowhere. And there was this beautiful woman lying next to him, naked with pale white skin and black hair with green seaweed and long black eyelashes. And he himself was tucked up with a sealskin around him, and when she opened her eyes and he looked into hers, their both green eyes met, and he knew that that was his mother, and she knew that he knew that she was his mother. Everybody knew it. It all happened like that. And he said, "Why did you leave me? You abandoned me. You didn't love me." Kids are like that. "What?" she said. "I gave you a cow that fed you.
I looked after you and swam after your boat and made sure when you fell over that I picked you up and rescued you. And didn't your brothers and I play with you all the time in the sea? My children had no one to fend for them. You had your father. I always loved you. But you were of the land and the sea. And then he thought about it. And shame and embarrassment crept into his face. You know, she'd really put her life at risk because those fish that he fished for, they eat seals. And anybody could come up on that island right now and capture her, harpoon her. And here he was in her skin, and he begged her to put her skin on and save herself. No, no, no. We'll wait until you're healed and ready. And she would look for fresh water and fish. And while he was on the mend, she was telling him all the lore of the sea and the creatures that she knew and had lived there. And then one morning she said, I shall leave you, but you are never abandoned, because you are of the sea as well. If you ever need our help, we are there for you, always. And one morning when he woke up, she was gone. And one of those he met was the daughter of someone, and her eyes met his, and then they smiled, and then they got married, and then they populated that crop with many, 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 many children, all of whom had green eyes, and webbed hands, and webbed feet. And that's all there is. But I'm sure there's more. Just keep your eyes and ears open, because you never know what you might find in the sea.
Selkie's Return. Did I get that right? Yeah.
Could you love a man who took your skin? I don't think we can answer the question. You know, I think, as Imogen has said, it's a kind of story that you've got to hold up and see it in all its many facets and see the different possibilities of it. And the poem that I've written is her speaking when she's gone back to the sea. Because I think even if you did ask her, maybe she couldn't answer, because maybe when things are happening to you, especially if they're done to you, you don't always know how you feel about them. And sometimes you just need to be back in your element, and you can sort of integrate and think about it and try and understand. So it's called A Selkie's Return. When I was returned to my limits, there was no moon out, and the stars lay headfirst in the sea. I am in space now, in the space of heredity and sound, each billowing of me 100 living lights in local dark. I have tried to reconcile you, as the sea slides its checkered mask under my skin. You have given me these felted words, still raining. The memory of your clumsy touch, the opposite of jade. The sullen sound of water from the smoky hosting shore. A halfway's flame of diligence and competence, dry warm. My heart is turquoise for my child, and green for you. Green as the fronds of sand-drunk sea life, marking their inheritance of hallowed health. I love you now, here where I can wish you well. I watch you make your footprints on the spangled shore and go on home. I sing at them, so that the stars come out within their porous grains to seem a numinous and multiple things stood. Then I return to the luminous walls of my blue inheritance and move with swimming the undulating world.
what does Selkie mean to you? What is she to you?
Well, I think I explored the Selkie, you know, when I did a PhD in shapeshifting, so I was looking all about, you know, human and animal but the Selkie is a really interesting one because, you know, most of the shapeshifting is with the land animals, but actually when you shift into the Selkie, it's not just the animal form, but it's as if it's a conversation about the sea itself, you know, and it is about sort of meeting the other, meeting the animal, but it's also about meeting this whole other a planet, really, this whole other land, this whole other sea, this whole other space. And so I think, you know, for me it's about so much, it's hard to encapsulate it, but it's really about kind of meeting of the mystery, you know, how we do it. I think it's very easy to say, you know, this is what the man does, this is what the woman does, but I think we're both of them, you know, we have to somehow make our own encounters with the mystery. We have to make inroads to it, we have to meet it. And sometimes that is, you know, it can seem like it reduces it, but that's the only way we can have a conversation with it. And then we're also the mystery, all of us, aren't we? So it's kind of that, it's that conversation. So yes, it's about becoming other, but it's also about our possibility of openness and meeting of the wild wilderness and the sea form.
And I just wonder, I want to ask you, Fleur, why do you think the Selkie as a symbol is just kind of coming up now? Because it's not just me working with this character from folklore. There are lots of other artists and tellers, and I don't know what. If you tell me what Selkie is to you,
Okay.
and we might unpick that a bit.
Well, I'm thinking that there might be something about actually Clarissa Pinkola Estes and her book Women Who Run With the Wolves. And I think when women read the book and when they read her telling of Sealskin, Soulskin, and her sort of psychoanalysis of that, it just strikes a chord.
Absolutely.
And I think it actually might be something to do with that. And then you sort of think, what? What's this? Where's this from? And then you go searching for all the stories, and there's such rich folklore about the tradition that you can't sort of not be beguiled by it, and you can't not want to, you know, dig deep. And when you dig deep, you get the gold. So all these lovely different stories that we've heard tonight, but you know, that's not the half of it. Duncan Williamson, who's a traditional storyteller from an unbroken tradition, he's a Pict. He was born on the banks of Loch Fyne, and he knew thousands and thousands of stories, and he had tens and tens of them, and you can get it on Amazon. It's called Tales of the Selkie People, I think, by Duncan Williamson, and it's full of these encounters between humans and Selkies. So I think, yeah, part of the appeal is it's so rich and deep and enduring. And it's funny because I was at college, I teach philosophy, and at college, sorry, I'm going on a bit now, but at college that I happened to have ended up being the person who sort of is the mentor for the Christian Union, weirdly. Being a bit of a goddess worshipping pagan, you know, it's a bit like, all right then, I'll do that, because nobody else was going to do it. So I ended up doing it, and I told my story to all the lovely, they're all girls, you know, these lovely Christian girls, and they come in and they talk about, you know, their faith and everything, and it's just so gorgeous. And I said, oh my God, I've got to tell this story tonight, and I really seriously, you know, need to practice. Sorry about that. You know, I really wanted to sort of, I was just gagging to tell this story, you know, to an audience. And I started telling it, and they just started giggling. These girls started flipping giggling to my deep and meaningful story, and I just thought it was so sweet, you know. Because they're a little out of touch. Darlings, not, and they say, like, what, a seal? You know, why would it be a seal? And so I talked to them about, you know, human beings used to live with animals, and they used to be, and it used to not be so unusual to have this idea that a human could turn into an animal, that an animal could turn into a human. Talked about, you know, leopard stories and spider women and you know, shape-shifting stories from all over the world, etc. And then they kind of got it, but it was interesting that they seemed so kind of divorced from the idea of this, our animalistic nature, you know, and how healing it is to contemplate that and think about it. So I think it's the artists getting it, aren't they, as we can see. But I think there's also a bit of work to do as well.
Yeah.
And the yang.
But part of me really recognises the Selkie as a mother story.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I had my children. I was into mermaids and mermaids and that vibe. And then I had my children, and then this gritty, heartrending folk story came to me, and I was like, that is the mother's story. Because it's tough. And it's hard. Dangerous, difficult, and then also there's a layer of it about consent and all of these things, and it's just it's huge. It's a huge story. But I feel it's the mother's story. Stasia.
It was a real gift to get to do this this work with you tonight, after seeing your readings and speaking to you about it, and then getting to work on Selkie stories. I mean, I've had them in my repertoire, but I got a chance to go deep with them and look right beyond. And looking at Clarissa Pinkola Este's takedown of it was essential as a point of departure, because what she says that really struck me in that whole chapter was, if you don't understand the code, like all of it, you're just going to repeat the same thing over and over and over and over again. I'm like, oh my God, that's what I've been doing. Losing the pelt, finding the lonely man, losing the pelt, finding the lonely man. Oh my God, there's I've got to, you have to then be brave and gritty and go for the rest of that. There's a whole bit about, hearing that call and answering it and being brave, and then about the crippling, where you, in every single story you start picking it out, the skin, the eyes don't see anymore, the skin gets dry, the woman can't be, she's losing touch because she's not in the place that she needs to be. And there's a lot of really tough issues that Imogen was saying about that, about abduction and abandonment, and about keeping people prisoner, for want of a better word. There's a word for it, but I can't think of the legal term. That all that happens, and then there's this whole thing about you've got to cut and go, and that the medial child, which is what we were talking about, in which the little girls haven't become yet, it's like that goes between the worlds, that can see that thing. And so your children are that extension, and they need to, they're going to bring you gifts as well, so to be on the lookout for that. I think the thing about that you were also saying, Joanna, is about the depth of it. To me, it's about really, it's about a depth and a freedom and a, an opportunity to just swim in a different world. And it's made me really think, because I've been being attracted to this wild swimming idea, and it's become quite a thing lately, if you haven't noticed. A lot of people are talking about it and doing it. And so reclaiming that, just jumping in anywhere, anytime, any place, and reclaiming our waterways and things, I think it's all coming around, where we're starting to now look at the code and know the code, so that Because we need to, because we as women and as men and as people need to move forward now and stop repeating those same little cycles. We need our cycle to be very long.
And Joanna, I wonder if you study folklore and fairy tale, and for this body of work in our book, there is a photographer who took pictures from the British Columbia, on island of British Columbia. So she connected with the Inuit version of Selkie, which has to do with Sedna, who's the mother of the sea creatures, which is again another quite violent attack on a female, and yet in her, I don't know if you all know Sedna, the short version is she is the mother of the sea creatures, and her father, who's the creator deity, lost his temper with her and cut off all her fingers. But her fingers fell into the ocean off the boat, and all her fingers became the whales and the seals and all the sea life that we have today. And it seems like there's some kind of, from the violent act, from that, or the taking, the trespass, there is some amazing fruitful divergence happens as a gift, but it seems so brutal in the instant. Don't know where I was going with that, but there's the Celtic canon, which we've talked about tonight, but there's the Inuit sort of.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so hard just talking about consent and violence and stories in folk. And at the moment, I'm looking at Sleeping Beauty, and there was an online. Somebody in Norwich, I think, said that she didn't want Sleeping Beauty to be taught to the younger kids because the prince kisses her without consent. But actually, if you look into the background of the story, it's much darker because the prince sleeps with her while she's sleeping. And that, I'm looking at all the different versions, and in 80% of the stories, that's what happens. And it's like, why is there this? Why is there this kind of? You think, maybe it happens in one story, it's a story that's told by many, but it's over and over and over and over again. It kind of seems wrapped up in the story. I don't know, something that I often as a storyteller think about, particularly when I'm working with the old Welsh stories, the Mabinogion, is what happened to the stories, or the moment of the writing down. What was that in itself? That's a violence, isn't it? Because that takes something that's like a butterfly, that's like the sea, that's so fluid and so flowing, and it pins it on the page. And at that moment when it's pinned, it can't change again. Just like Selkie losing her skin. So I think that when we're working with these stories that have been pressed into pages, particularly maybe with the Inuit stories, we don't know the manner of collection or how they got there. I just think that we have to be so aware of the subtlety involved and the respect we have to give them in order to breathe life again. And we can't say this means this or that means that. I think as women, we have to really let them come into our bodies and kind of release them. What does it mean? But also what do all the layers mean? But also give them permission to mean different things, give ourselves permission to tell them differently, but only when we really have let them sink into it and really work with them, if that makes any sense. So I think, if you talk about the violence of the stories, I think that the very act of them becoming those frozen stories was a violent act in the beginning, even though if we hadn't, we wouldn't have them, possibly. But I think we need to know that, and we also need to kind of know that there's a possibility of kind of now, as we say, changing the cycles, but also allowing the stories to be more fluid and flowy, and just like this, that taking the story and actually, creating with it in a completely different way, and also the ways that creating actually from the body, working with your experience in the body and kind of breathing that into the story, that makes it something really different.
Has anybody got any questions they'd like to tell us tonight, or any thoughts they want to share?
But I'd quite like to say something.
Yeah.
Thank you for a really beautiful evening. I'm really interested in stories, and I do know some of the Selkie stories. And what interests me, I don't have children actually, but what interests me is I see your point there, but what I find that whole sense of the longing, for me, is what it's very much about. And in that sense that we as women we're longing to be wild, and we're longing to belong to the earth because we are the custodians of the earth. And that's been lost. And I think in this kind of lost times that we're in, which is really interesting to just say, what is it now? It's so interesting. I think you're right, that it is this notion of us kind of reconnecting with that. And just to share with you that recently I read a really good book by a woman called Sharon Blackie.
Yeah, Joanna works with Sharon.
She just says kind of what I'm trying to say really, and I really recommend the book to any of you. If you're interested in, I can't remember the book, but it's
If Women Rose Rooted.
That's it.
She also has in one of the chapters, she has a beautiful Selkie version when actually she puts on her old skin and finds that it doesn't fit. And actually to get her skin, she has to go on this quest to find this old ancient crone in the cave and actually create her own skin again. So it's very beautiful. Yes, thank you.
And it's a great book to read if you kind of, if you feel any moment in your life, whether you're a maiden or you're a crone, but it's that sense of the journey that we all make. And what she's doing is she's reframing the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell. And that's very refreshing for me. We've got this heroine's journey, it's our journey.
Very different from the hero's
very
journey.
different.
Very different from the hero's journey. I don't want to interrupt you.
No.
Because as a mother of a 15-year-old daughter, it's hell on earth. But that is because that's what you go through. We all had this thing with our mother. We absolutely did, because you have to differentiate from your mother and separate, and then you have to, and then where the hero goes on this, like, you know, path of wizards and getting all the special tools. We go on the path of like trials and meet ogres and toads and all kinds of what, and have to slay a dragon, which mostly these dragons are people that we know, and people that, you know, are of our own family sometimes, and then, or even parts of ourselves. And but then it all comes around, and there was a woman, this Marjorie, she worked with Joseph Campbell, and she wrote actually the heroine's journey, and she's got
Maureen.
Yes,
Moorcock.
that's
her.
Google it. And and so if you look at it, it's different, but it comes back around because then you heal that. It comes back around. But this is the thing with stories which are so interesting, and why you have to look beyond, because when they're written down, many of these stories which are told by women are written down by men. Many of these stories that were told from people that are of the earth and of an agrarian culture or of different pagan religions, they were then written down by Christian people and have a whole different thing going on, which you have to kind of scrape that away and look beneath the skin of those things.
Yeah. Well, there are techniques that you can use, and there are things that you can do with the stories to work on the story, to discover the meaning in the story. And there's a storyteller that I'm working with called Shona Lee Cumbers, who's from an unbroken oral tradition. She's Jewish, and her granny, her Bubba, was in Auschwitz and survived Auschwitz and came out. Her mother came over on the kinder transport. Then the Bubba came over when she was released. And then after Shona Lee was born, she was taught these 4,000 stories from the ages of about 4 to 16. But not only that, she was also taught a whole technique for how to hold them all in your body, and how to remember all of them, and how to work with them and work out all of the meaning of them. So it's just the most incredible thing, and she's teaching this technique, and I think the thing that Clarissa Pinkola-Estes is doing is applying the Jungian, psychoanalytic sort of methods that he used, and Shona Lee's doing this completely different thing that comes out of a different tradition. But both of those methods for digging through and mining the stories, I think, are incredibly fruitful. And so, and also just sort of going through life as well. I mean, you were talking about, after you had a baby, oh God, that story made sense. Same. you know, I mean, I can remember sort of thinking, what the hell does that happen? And then you kind of have a baby and you look at all the relationships, it's like, oh yeah, I understand that. I understand those wicked stepmothers because I've had all of those thoughts. And because I've heard those stories, I know I'm not going to do it. So I just think they're amazing for getting you to you know, think about what she thinks of her and what you think she thinks of him, and then what you think she thinks of him thinks about you, you know, just to try and explore the nexus of relationships with friends and family. I think the stories are just amazing.
Yeah, it's all in there.
Yeah.
It's all in there.
Yeah.
And it's like you know it when you know it, and because all of us today here will go to sleep tonight and we'll embody and percolate different versions of everything we've heard because of where we're at in our lives. And there'll come a point in the future when we cross another threshold in life and part of the story will make sense when it was never obvious before. And I should really say a huge thank you to Joanna Ruby, who's sitting on the front row, because you gave me my first story. Was it 10 years ago? A long time ago, and Joanna set me on my path. And a story on a laundrette in North London, and it was just a nice story. And then I went through transitions and thresholds, and the story kept coming back to support me, and it has walked with me for all that time. So thank you for my path. Thank you all for sharing space with me and the beautiful music of you guys, and all you guys for lending your ears. Thank you for coming. I think we have to call it a night. So